On November 25th, 1892, the sky over Newport was tinged with an unnatural crimson color. This was not a sunset. This was millions of dollars burning. Imagine the smell, a pungent mixture of burning mahogany, melting varnish, and salty ocean air. On the cliff of Oka Point, where Atlantic waves had crashed against the rocks for centuries, the most luxurious wooden house in America was ablaze, the first Breakers estate. The owner of the house, Cornelius Vanderbilt II, the richest man in the United States at that time, stood and watched as the fire devoured his sanctuary. At that moment, he was not a railroad magnate controlling the arteries of the entire country. He was simply a man who had lost his home. But it was on this night, amid the ashes and smoke, that an idea was born that would define his family's fate for a century to come. Most people, having lost everything, retreat. Cornelius Vanderbilt decided to advance. He looked at the smoldering ruins and, according to family law, quietly uttered words that became a prophecy. "We will build again, but this time, nothing will burn, never." You have probably seen photographs of the current Breakers, a colossal stone palace reminiscent of 16th century Italian palazzos. Tourists today walk through its halls, admiring the gold and marble, and take selfies against the ocean. But they do not know that this house is not just a demonstration of wealth. It is a mausoleum. It is a fortress built by a man who tried to protect himself from fate, but lost the most important battle. The story told in guidebooks is one of success and the splendor of the Gilded Age. But the real story, hidden behind the facade of Indiana limestone, is a chronicle of the slow, agonizing collapse of a family that seemed untouchable. Why did this man, who possessed a fortune that in today's money exceeded $2 billion, decide to build a house in which it was practically impossible to live? A house where even the bathtubs were carved from solid pieces of marble to eliminate any possibility of rot or fire. The answer lies not in vanity, but in fear. The irony of fate was that Cornelius was building an eternal home for a family that was already beginning to disintegrate even before the first stone was laid. Let us return to that moment when the decision was made. 1893. America is at the peak of industrial growth, but also on the threshold of great upheavals. Cornelius Vanderbilt, grandson of the legendary Commodore, feels the weight of the family name. He was not a business pirate like his grandfather. He was a guardian, a serious, pious, incredibly hard-working man who regarded his wealth as a sacred duty. While other heirs squandered fortunes on horse races and parties in Paris, Cornelius sat in his office at New York's Grand Central Station, working 12 hours a day. His wife, Alice Claypool Gwynn, was a perfect match for him. A short, strict woman from an old but impoverished aristocracy. When they met, she taught in a Sunday school. No one could have imagined then that this modest teacher would become Alice of the Breakers, a woman whose word would be law in New York's high society. Together they made the perfect pair for creating something grandiose. They did not want just a summer cottage. They wanted to build a symbol of stability in a world that was changing too quickly. To implement their plan, they hired Richard Morris Hunt, an architect who had already become a legend. Hunt understood their pain after the fire. He proposed a radical project to use steel, stone, brick, and marble. No wood in the structure. Even the boiler room was relocated to an underground bunker hundreds of meters from the house, so that no spark could reach the living quarters. It was an engineering marvel and architectural madness at the same time. Construction was supposed to take just 2 years. Thousands of workers, craftsmen from Italy and France, tons of marble shipped across the ocean. But as the walls rose, a shadow loomed over Cornelius himself. No one who saw him inspecting the construction site, clutching his cane in hand, knew that his hours were already counting down. He was building a house for centuries, but he himself had only a few years left. The Breakers was to become a place where his children and grandchildren would live for centuries. However, fate had prepared a completely different role for this stone giant. This house would become the stage for one of the most poignant human dramas in the history of American wealth. A drama about how even the thickest walls cannot protect from the fragility of human life. To understand the true tragedy of the Breakers, one must look at the blood of its creator. Cornelius Vanderbilt II was not like his legendary grandfather, the Commodore. If the grandfather was a ruthless predator tearing wealth from the world by force, then the grandson was born with the heavy burden of a guardian's responsibility. Having inherited a fortune estimated at $70 million, he regarded this capital not as a privilege, but as a sacred duty. He was a man of deep faith and strict discipline. He began the day with prayer and ended it by checking financial reports, working himself to exhaustion. His marriage to Alice Claypool Gwynne became the foundation of this strict philosophy. Alice was not a typical socialite. She came from an old, respected family, but before meeting Cornelius, she worked as a simple teacher in the Sunday school of St. Bartholomew's Church. Their wedding in 1867 became a strategic merger. The endless resources of the Vanderbilts' new money united with the impeccable reputation and aristocratic taste of the Gwynnes' old money. Alice gave the family what could not be bought on the stock exchange: social legitimacy. Planning for the new stone house began in 1893, precisely at the moment when America was hit by the most severe financial panic. Building a palace when banks were collapsing and the country was starving seemed madness. But for Cornelius, it was a survival strategy, a manifesto of stability. He was fighting not for luxury, but for order. The Breakers was to become an unshakable anchor in the stormy sea of social changes. Cornelius and Alice believed in the great illusion. If you build strong enough walls of stone and steel, the chaos of the outside world cannot penetrate inside. It was a desperate attempt to buy eternity and security. They did not yet understand that they were building a golden cage, and the main enemies, illness and death, were already inside, in the very biology of their family, and no walls could stop them. In 1893, when the ashes of the old house were finally scattered by the winds of the Atlantic, Cornelius Vanderbilt II forged his most important strategic alliance. This was not a financial contract or a political alliance, but a creative partnership that was to forever change the face of the American elite. He summoned Richard Morris Hunt, an architect who had already become a legend of his time, the Dean of American Architecture, the man who brought the grandeur of the French École des Beaux-Arts to the United States. Hunt and Vanderbilt were men of the same mold, both aging, both obsessed with perfection, and both feeling that this was their last great chance to leave a mark in history. If Cornelius provided the resources, Hunt provided the vision. The strategy was bold. They decided to abandon the then popular style of French chateau, which nouveaux riches chose, and turn to something more ancient and weighty. They chose the style of 16th-century Italian palazzos from Genoa and Turin. The choice was deeply symbolic. Genoese palaces belonged to merchant princes and bankers who, like the Vanderbilts, controlled the trade routes of their world. It was a way to say without words, "We are not upstarts. We are the new aristocracy, equal to the Medici." On the cliff of Oka Point, the fusion of two completely different worlds began. On one side, ancient European aesthetics, marble, alabaster, mosaic. On the other, advanced American engineering. It was a marriage of art and industry. Hunt designed the house not as a traditional dwelling, but as a modern skyscraper laid on its side. The building's skeleton was made of powerful steel beams, the very ones used for constructing railroad bridges. This was Cornelius's personal guarantee, not a gram of wood in the load-bearing structures. Even under the luxurious parquet floors were hidden concrete slabs and steel trusses. Construction turned into a military operation. The speed was unimaginable for that time. To complete the palace in less than 2 years, hundreds of workers labored around the clock on the site. For the first time in the history of private construction in Newport, electric lighting was used, allowing work at night. Local residents watched in amazement as a stone monster grew on the cliff under the hum of arc lamps. It was like building a pyramid. Marble was shipped from Italy, limestone from Indiana, stone from Canada. The logistics were so complex that a temporary railroad was built right to the construction site for delivering materials. The union of Cornelius and his wife Alice in this project revealed itself in a new light. Alice took on the role of curator of the interior world. While her husband dealt with the steel skeleton and the budget, she worked with decorators from the firm Allard et Fils in Paris. She approved every detail, from the color of the velvet to the pattern on the ceiling. It was a fusion of masculine thirst for security and feminine aspiration for elegance. Alice understood that this house must become a stage on which she would reign. In this union, there was no room for sentimentality, only cold calculation and impeccable taste. However, behind the facade of success lurked a growing conflict. The Breakers was conceived as a summer cottage, a place of rest. But the scale of the project got out of control. The area of the house amounted to more than 11,000 square meters. It had 70 rooms, 33 of which were intended for the staff. This was no longer a house, but an institution requiring an army for maintenance. Neighbors watched this construction with a mixture of admiration and horror. The Vanderbilts violated the unwritten rule of Newport's cottage community: to be rich, but restrained. They built Versailles in America's backyard. But the most important thing was happening invisibly to the eye. Richard Morris Hunt, creating this masterpiece, was dying. He suffered from gout and other illnesses, and each blueprint came to him with difficulty. Cornelius Vanderbilt, paying the bills, also felt his strength leaving him. A stroke was already awaiting him in the near future. Two great men were building a monument to eternity, investing their last vital forces into it. They hurried, as if knowing that time was almost up. The Breakers grew with frightening speed, floor by floor, devouring millions of dollars and the health of its creators, becoming a stone embodiment of their race with death. When you pass through the massive 9-meter gates of the Breakers, you are met not by hospitality, but by overwhelming imperial power. The facade of Indiana limestone rises over the ocean like an impregnable cliff, ignoring the wind and salt. Entering the Great Hall, you enter a space that denies human scale, an atrium 14 meters high, where the walls are clad in stone, imitating the street facades of an Italian courtyard. Psychologically, you feel not inside a house, but on an open city square, vulnerable and small in the face of eternity. This is an exact portrait of Cornelius's soul. The public here has completely swallowed the personal, and protection has turned into isolation. Proceed to the dining room, and you will feel the cold of this grandeur. 12 monolithic columns of red Numidian marble support the ceiling, where goddesses are depicted. The table for 34 persons was set with gold, but the stone acoustics made intimate conversation impossible. Guests had to almost shout to be heard at the other end. Sound here does not sink into softness, but echoes loudly off hard surfaces. A stark contrast is provided by the morning room, shining with unique panels covered in platinum. Here, in the cold, silvery light of the eastern sun, the family sought rare moments of seclusion. But even here the chairs stood in strict symmetrical protocol, not for bodily comfort. The entire house is a triumph of total control over matter. Bathtubs were carved from solid blocks of marble weighing 1.5 tons each to eliminate leaks. Faucets provided both fresh and seawater. This most complex machine was serviced by 40 servants, invisible shadows living on the third floor, accessible via separate staircases. The Breakers was created as an ideal world excluding chaos and chance, where every detail, from the gigantic baccarat crystal chandeliers to the copper pots in the two-story kitchen, screamed of the master's power, but where, paradoxically, there was almost no room left for simple, unregulated life. In August 1895, the Breakers shone with lights at a grand ball in honor of daughter Gertrude's debut. It seemed the dream had come true, but the triumph lasted only a moment. Just a year later, in 1896, Cornelius Vanderbilt II suffered a devastating stroke. The man who built an indestructible fortress against external fire burned out from within due to overexertion. The cruel irony of fate. He created a perfect machine for living, but his own body refused to live in it. It was precisely within these flawless walls that the drama unfolded, splitting the clan. While Cornelius's body weakened, his will remained ironclad, turning into tyranny. His eldest son and main heir, Cornelius III, committed an unforgivable sin in his father's eyes. He fell in love with Grace Wilson, a socialite whom the parents considered a calculating schemer. The conflict between father and son reached its peak under the vaults of the Breakers. The dying magnate issued an ultimatum: either submission or exile. The son chose love and married against his father's will. In response, Cornelius, whose hand could barely hold a pen, rewrote the will. He effectively disinherited the firstborn, reducing his share to a humiliating minimum and passing the title of family head to his younger brother, Alfred. This was a moment of profound moral ambivalence. The creator of the family temple personally destroyed family unity for the sake of principles. Alice, torn between duty to her husband and maternal love, was forced to side with the dying tyrant, forever changing her relationship with her son. The last 3 years of his life, Cornelius spent in the Breakers not as a lord, but as an elite prisoner. Servants wheeled him in a wheelchair through the marble halls, which were too vast for one sick man. He gazed at the Atlantic through panoramic windows, protected from storms, but utterly isolated from life. The great house, intended to be a symbol of the family's immortality, turned into a golden sarcophagus for its creator, even before his physical death. The death of Cornelius Vanderbilt II in 1899 was not just the end of one man's life. It became the beginning of the slow agony of an entire era. Widow Alice was left alone in the 70-room labyrinth. For 35 years, she became the guardian of a dying ritual. While the outside world changed rapidly, automobiles, jazz, women's rights appeared, inside the Breakers, time stood still. Alice continued to change outfits 7 times a day and demanded full table settings, even when dining alone. This was no longer luxury, but desperate resistance to chaos. But the real blow, which shook the house's foundation more than any fire, came not from fire, but from water and new geopolitics. In 1913, the 16th Amendment to the U.S. Constitution was adopted, introducing the federal income tax. The golden stream that sustained the palace's upkeep began to dry up. And in 1915, a tragedy occurred that finally destroyed the dynastic dreams. Alfred Gwynne Vanderbilt, the very son whom Cornelius had appointed as the main heir instead of the prodigal firstborn, perished. He was aboard the liner Lusitania when it was hit by a German torpedo. Witnesses claimed that Alfred gave his life jacket to a woman with a child, knowing that he could not swim. The heir to an empire built on ruthlessness and calculation died as a hero, sacrificing himself. The ocean, which the Breakers' windows had gazed upon for years, took the one who was meant to own that view. After Alice's death in 1934, the house passed to the younger daughter, Gladys, Countess Szczecenie. By that time, the breakers had become an economic monster. The Great Depression destroyed the fortunes of the neighbors. Newport's palaces were demolished one after another, or turned into boarding houses because no one could afford to pay property taxes and maintain a staff of 40 servants. The breakers stood closed, with furniture covered, like a giant crypt. The question was stark: sell the land to developers for demolition, or find a new purpose for this colossus. It was here that the main transformation occurred. Gladys, raised in a golden cage, did what her father could not even imagine. She realized that the only way to save the family legacy was to give it away. She stopped perceiving the breakers as private property and saw it as a historical document. In 1948, in the midst of the post-war reshaping of the world, she took an unprecedented step. She leased the mansion to the newly created Preservation Society of Newport County for a symbolic sum, $1 a year. This was the moment of truth. The iron gates, created to keep out strangers, swung open to the public. What had been built as an exclusive fortress for the elite became a museum for all. Gladys retained only the third floor for herself, where the family continued to live in the summer, while downstairs, on the marble staircases, thousands of tourists walked who had paid for admission tickets. Elitism was sacrificed for survival. The ambition of ownership transformed into a mission of preservation. The stone giant survived only because it ceased to be a home and became a symbol. Today, when you stand on the upper loggia of the breakers and look at the Atlantic Ocean, you see the same landscape that the paralyzed Cornelius Vanderbilt II saw in his final days. But the context has changed irrevocably. What was built as America's most private fortress became Rhode Island's most public museum. Annually, more than 400,000 tourists pass through the same doors that once admitted only the select from Mrs. Astor's 400. The story of the breakers is, essentially, a real-life version of The Great Gatsby, only told to the end. If J. Gatsby built a mansion to reclaim the past and one woman, Vanderbilt built to secure the future and an entire dynasty. And both suffered defeat in the face of inexorable time. Gatsby died from a bullet, while Vanderbilt's dream dissolved in taxes and social changes. The paradox of this house is that it survived only because the family acknowledged its defeat in the attempt to maintain it single-handedly. Today, the third floor of the house remains closed to the public. Descendants of the Vanderbilt Szczecenie family still stay there during summer visits. This creates a surreal picture. Downstairs, tourists in shorts photograph the dining room, where meals were once served on gold, while upstairs, right above their heads, the great-great-grandchildren of the house's creator live in the modern world, hidden from view. This is a living metaphor of how democracy swallowed aristocracy. The palace remained, but its inhabitants retreated to the attic of history. The lesson of the breakers is frighteningly relevant to us today. We live in an era of a new Gilded Age, when tech billionaires build their bunkers and spaceships. Cornelius Vanderbilt II proved that one can conquer the element of fire by building a house of stone and steel. One can buy the best marble from Italy and hire the world's best architects. But one cannot build a wall that will protect from inner emptiness, family discord, or loss of meaning. When you leave the mansion's grounds, pay attention to the waves crashing against the rocks below. It is they that gave the house its name. Breakers, that is, breaking waves. This is the only thing here that cost not a cent and that will exist when even this stone turns to dust. Cornelius Vanderbilt wanted to leave eternity behind him. And he succeeded, but not at all as he planned. He left us not a monument to his power, but a majestic reminder of human fragility. He built a house that will never burn, but history has shown that the most important things in life, children's love, health, peace of mind, burn up instantly, and no marble can hold them.